do her job, and when she made a move to cover the embezzlement somewhere else, that's when they caught her. So Price Waterhouse manager comes back to me, he said, "Congratulations." He says, "Is that the first notch in your gun?" I said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "You get credit for finding that fraud." I said, "Credit for finding the fraud? Go back and look at the work papers. I passed on it. Immaterial, no further work deemed necessary." You have to look for it. Audits are a painful experience. Don't let those smiles fool you when you walk in the door. Those people are not happy to see you. I mean, I know they're happy to see me, but you just wouldn't believe how many auditors delude themselves into thinking that the clients are happy for them. No, audits aren't fun. They require a spirit of cooperation. If you don't have the client's help, you are never, ever going to get the audit done. Not long ago, I was doing some work for a large construction company out of Connecticut, and I'd actually helped them investigate a fraud, and they came to me and they said, "Gee, do you think we could use an internal audit function? We're a billion-dollar company. Do you think we could use internal audit?" I said, yeah, I think you could. Well, accounting geek that I am, starting an internal audit function from scratch had always been on my bucket list. So I am fired up about this job. The very first place I went was a small operation that they had up in Bangor, Maine. And I really haven't put together a plan or anything. I figure I'm just going to go in and I'm going to do the audit, and I'm going to make notes, and I'm going to write up the audit programs as I go along, do it on the fly. So I show up in Bangor. I meet the general manager of the operation and his finance manager, and we trade pleasantries for about 15 minutes or so, and he looks at me and he says, "Well, where do you want to start?" I'm thinking like, okay, let's see, back in Price Waterhouse days, the A schedules were always the cash, and the first line is petty cash, so let's go count petty cash. So I go down to the finance manager's office. I haven't counted petty cash in over 35 years. She pulls out this little box. I count out like about $100. I write it all down and stuff. I said, "Okay, where's the bank recs?" And she hands me a stack of manila folders about this big. And I'm walking out of her office, and I flip over the first page, and right there in the first line it says, "Cash on hand, $3,500. I turn around and say, "Mary, I'm not real quick on the uptick sometime, but I just counted $100, and this says cash on hand $3,500. Can you explain the difference to me?" She says, "I took the money." Based on my keen insights and years of experience, I knew something was wrong. Now, the point of this story is, I might as well have just packed up and left right then and there. Here is the first internal audit of the company, and we're 45 minutes into it, and probably the most trusted person in the whole operation is being led out the door. Now, nobody blamed me that Mary had stolen $3,400, but they're thinking, "Oh my God, if Mary could be stealing, anybody could be stealing. Maybe I'm stealing and I don't know it, and this guy's going to find it." So for the next 2 weeks, I got no help at all. I got no support. Finally, youth, inexperience, and ego. Mark Twain tells a story that when he was 16 years old, he became very frustrated with his father. He thought his father was totally out of touch with modern times, didn't know what was going on, so he ran away from home. And after 2 years of riding up and down riverboats on the Mississippi, he came back home and he was absolutely amazed how much his father had learned in those 2 years. See these gray hairs? I earned every single one of them. I do lectures in college, and I tell the college kids flat out, I said, y'all enjoy it right now. You will never be as smart as you are right now. I guarantee 1 year out of college, you're not going to be as smart as you are today. So if you look at the structure of a big accounting firm, you got the staff, the seniors, the managers, the partners. Well, each layer there filters the information going up the line. And that kid that's 6 months out of college might not realize that that financing arrangement that he or she really doesn't understand, but they don't want to tell the client that they don't understand it because they think it'll look like idiots. That really represents off-balance sheet financing. So they don't tell the senior. The senior doesn't tell the manager doesn't tell the partner, and the fraud isn't found. Stay until you find it. Audits are expensive. The clients know how much the externals cost every single solitary hour. And the clients know to a certain extent that they are paying the audit firm to train their staff. There is incentive to be timely and efficient, and there's disincentive to cause trouble. You don't want to tick off the people that are paying the bill. Now, not long ago, I was doing work for a company. It was this same construction company I was telling you about, and they were doing a big joint venture in D.C. They were redoing the Beltway around D.C. Big joint venture that required an audit, certified audit. And I don't exactly know how they arranged this, but they arranged it so I could work on the audit team. So here I was, a light staff accountant at 60 years of age. This is like really, really cool. So I'm doing a disbursements test. They selected, a whole bunch of disbursements at random, and we pulled the files, and this one file, the invoice they selected was, say, $1 million. It was included on a check for $5 million, and they gave me the whole folder to back up the $5 million. Well, my $1 million invoice was in there. It was the only thing that was in there. There was no other support for the other $4 million that appeared on the check. So I went to I went to the Big Four senior. That really was a slip. Y'all forget about that, okay? I went to the Big Four senior and I said, what do I do about this? He said, you didn't see that. I said, I beg your pardon. He said, we made a statistically valid sample. If you stray outside the boundaries of that statistically valid sample, you ruin the validity of the sample. Excuse me. Okay, addressing the challenges of finding fraud. There are two things that happened to me in my life that gave me experience in forensic accounting and fraud finding. This is the way it happened to me. It happened by accident. I did not plan it this way. Number one, I moved from external auditing to internal auditing. For the noblest of reasons, I did it for the money. But now all of a sudden, the rules changed. No longer did the rules say that you're trying to resolve exceptions as quickly and efficiently as possible. Now the rules say, stay until you're satisfied. Now, it's pretty amazing that in Wadena, Minnesota, and Lincoln, Nebraska, I got satisfied real quick. It took me a long time to get satisfied when I was in Bermuda and Cayman and Ireland. But now all of a sudden I had the freedom to turn over one more stone, to follow one more lead. And I could stay until I found it. More importantly, I went to work as an auditor for a financial services company where deceit and deception were an integral part of the corporate culture. Everywhere we went, somebody was stealing. Everybody knew that everywhere we went, somebody was stealing. It was like a cat and mouse game. I actually believe that corporate expected people to pad their income whenever they could, and the purpose of internal audit was just to make sure that it didn't get out of hand. So I knew fraud was there, I could look for it, and I could stay until I found it. In fact, gospel truth, I wrote an audit program 6 months after I was there. They asked me to write an audit program. The last step in the audit program said, if you haven't found it yet, extend the audit a week. Now that brings me to my next point. Finding fraud is easier if it's always there. I don't mind looking for a needle in a haystack if I actually know that the needle is there. This is one of the challenges that you all have. You don't know usually that the needle is there. And it is very, very, very difficult to focus and concentrate on 100 transactions testing if you really don't think you're going to find anything. Also, don't be too smart. Now I'm going to show you a picture of me when I was with Price Waterhouse. In case your parents didn't tell you, the 70s were great. I mean, that's real partner material, don't you think? Now, if something like this could work for Price Waterhouse, think of everything else that was going on. When people knew that the auditors were coming, this is about the last thing that they expected to walk through the door, and smart was not exactly the first thing that came to mind. One of the best compliments that I ever received came in a kind of backhanded kind of way. I was doing a job for an insurance company, and it took me a couple days to figure out exactly how the fraud had been perpetrated. And then after I figured it out, I thought to myself, these people were about the stupidest people that I had ever run into. I mean, how did they possibly think they were going to get away with this? They were so dumb. So I called the director of the Special Investigative Unit of the insurance company. I told him what I found, and I explained how the fraud was committed. And he said, "It's absolutely amazing how you do what you do." He said, "It's like you think just like they do." Now, I'm not sure if he was saying that I think like a crook or I think like a stupid person. At any rate, I think it was meant to be a compliment, so I took it. Now here's the deal. Y'all are smart. You know how things are supposed to be. And when you know how things are supposed to be, it's extremely hard to break out of that paradigm. I'm sure that you all are familiar with the 9-dot puzzle. The purpose is to draw 4 contiguous lines that pass through all 9 dots. What you might not know is this puzzle gave us the term out-of-the-box thinking. You have to look at things from a different perspective. Whether you call it reading between the lines, using logic to draw conclusions, a gut instinct, you have to be able to use inferential thinking. Inference is the reasoning involved in drawing conclusions based on evidence and prior knowledge rather than observation. In plain English, that means uncommon use of common sense. Okay, I mentioned before I do lectures at colleges, and the college professors tell me nowadays that one of the main things lacking in today's students is this ability to utilize inferential thinking. I mean, they want to go into the textbook and memorize that A equals B and that B equals C. But they get out in the real world and there is no B, and they don't know what to do. They can't make that association. I was working a claim one time, and it was a pretty good claim. I mean, really, it was a fire, and wasn't a particularly bad fire, but it set off the sprinklers. And when the sprinklers went off, all the computers got wet. And we all know what happens if a computer gets wet. All is lost. So the company, I think the claim was for probably about $250,000, business interruption claim. The company, the insured, claimed that it took them 6 months to reconstruct all their data, and that they lost $250,000 as a result, primarily due to having to reconstruct their data. So the insurance company hired me to go in and look at their financial statements to see if $250,000 was a reasonable loss. So I went in and I just started downloading massive amounts of material. And I'm getting real excited about this because, I mean, their financial information is a mess. It's an absolute mess. And I know it's going to take me a good month just to reconstruct it to the point where I can make some kind of conclusion. Furthermore, I'm seeing enough to know that this company did not lose $250,000. They're losing their shirt. So I think the insurance company is going to be perfectly happy to pay me for a month to reconstruct these financial statements because the claim is worth $0. Well, all of a sudden I'm driving home that evening and it hits me like a blinding flash of the obvious. All the information that I had downloaded came from the cloud. It had always been on the cloud. They didn't lose anything. Day after the fire, they could go out to Best Buy, get a $300 computer, plug into the net, and hit the ground running. I called the insurance company. I said, I got good news and I got bad news. Are we beginning to see a pattern here? Okay, which balance sheet do you prefer? We started a business. We've been in business 1 year. Would you rather have $1 million in cash and $1 million in retained earnings, or $1 million in accounts receivable and $1 million in retained earnings? How many people want the cash? How many people want the receivables? Of course we want the cash. Cash in hand. There's too many bad things that can happen to accounts receivable, not the least of which they don't get collected. But what if this company is a cash basis taxpayer? In version number 1, come April 15th, you're going to have to write $400,000 worth of checks to various government entities. In version number 2, you get an interest-free loan from the government for a year of $400,000. Now, let's carry this one step further. Let's say you're auditing version number 2, and you go into the CFO's office on January the 2nd, and you open the top drawer, and you find $1 million worth of client checks in there, all dated November and December. And the CFO says, you know, things just got so hectic toward the end of the year, I just didn't have a chance to get to the bank, but you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to be at the bank this afternoon. In fact, I'm leaving right now. I'm taking those checks right down to the bank right now and getting them deposited. I'm glad you found them for me. I really appreciate that. Now, are we going to call that fraud, or is that brilliant financial management? As the former CFO of a small cash basis taxpayer, I have been advised not to answer that question. Fraud is like a magic trick. It is incredibly baffling until you know the secret. Let's go back to that little bank in North Carolina. Okay, the lady that was responsible to reconcile the interoffice account, she ran an adding machine tape of all the items every day, balanced it to the general ledger, put a rubber band around it. That was it. It balanced to the general ledger. What we didn't know was she took a business card. She ran a tape on everything. She knew exactly how much she stole. She put the business card in the adding machine, punched in the number that she had stolen to make it balance, hit the total button. We never, ever thought to add the adding machine tape. Finally, finding the story behind the numbers. Okay, numbers are the language of business. You can blame it on the ancient Phoenician merchants because they invented numbers so they could keep track of all their trades. You can blame it on Luca Pacioli, who wrote the first accounting textbook over 500 years ago. And it has hardly changed a lick since. But numbers are the language of business. Most people are either geared toward numbers or they're not. Since y'all are sitting here tonight, I think y'all are geared toward numbers. I'm geared toward numbers. I am not geared to foreign language. In fact, anytime I try to do foreign language, there's a good chance I'll get in trouble. We were doing an audit up in a little town about 60 miles outside of Montreal. And if you know anything about the Canadian province of Quebec, it is French. And the farther you go outside of Montreal, the more French it becomes. And 60 miles was very French. Well, whenever I was on the road, I tried my best to acclimate to the local culture. I always tried to fit in. So I always tried to throw in little French phrases whenever it seemed appropriate. And one night after work, a whole bunch of us went out to a local drinking establishment. We had a few beers, we were dancing, I was up on the dance floor, I came back, I was all hot and sweaty. I sat down next to two French girls, I said, "Oh, je suis chaude. Je suis, I am chaude, hot." They looked at me, and I could tell by the look in their eye that they appreciated my efforts to fit in with the locals and to speak French. In fact, I got such a good reaction that probably for the next 30, 45 minutes, I was je suis chauding all over the place. Finally, I happened to be in the men's room, and there was this guy in there I knew that was bilingual. He said, "Do you know what you're saying?" I said, "Yeah, je suis, I am chaude hot." He said, "That's not quite the way it translates en français. If you are feeling warmth because of the temperature or because of physical exertion, you say j'ai chaud, I have hot. Je suis chaud translates as I've got the hots or I'm real horny." The moral of this story is, if you are not wired for numbers, you darn well better hire somebody that is, or you could get in trouble. As you see me today, I am the same size I was when I played football for Wake Forest University 40 years ago. 6'3", 225 significantly rearranged pounds. Perfect size for a wide receiver or a defensive back. Trouble was, I was an offensive lineman, a center, and 225 pounds was small even for those